The only sound in the office was the hum of the server room and the chattering of my teeth. It was 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve in Chicago. While my CEO was likely sipping champagne in a warm chalet in Aspen, I was sitting here in the dark, finalizing the year-end accounts, just praying that my bonus would hit the bank in time for my son's tuition. Then, the screen flickered. For a split second, a command line flashed in red. Code 99. Auto reroute. My bonus wasn't just delayed, it was being stolen. I reached for the mouse to investigate, but the cursor slid away on its own, fighting against my hand. Someone was watching me. Before I tell you how a box of dusty handwritten notebooks brought down a corrupt CEO, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe the truth always leaves a paper trail, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this ends. My name is Sarah Jenkins. 42 years old, a widow, a mother, and for 15 years, the financial controller of VS Holdings. I am a woman made of routine and precision. I trust ledgers. I trust balance sheets. I trust the absolute, cold truth of mathematics. But as I sat in the dark of my office on that Christmas Eve, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. The red warning text, Code 99, was no longer on the screen, but it was burned into my mind. I didn't need to see the ghost cursor moving against my hand again to understand what had just happened. It wasn't a glitch, it was a robbery. And they hadn't just taken a number on a spreadsheet, they had taken the $12,000 meant for my son's tuition. They had taken my survival. My hands, usually steady enough to sign checks for millions of dollars, were trembling violently. I gripped my phone, staring at the 10-second video I had managed to record. I had the evidence. I had the routing number. But I also had the terrified realization that I was the only living soul in a 40-story building, and the security camera in the corner of the ceiling was staring unblinkingly at me. The red recording light was solid. They were watching. Then, the silence broke. In the corner of the room, the network printer whirred to life. It wasn't printing a report. It groaned, the rollers spinning with a violent mechanical sound, and ejected a single sheet of paper. I walked over to it, my legs feeling numb, like I was walking through deep snow. I picked up the page. It was completely black. Edge-to-edge toner, a waste of ink, a waste of resources. A message. We see you. Go home. I didn't stay to shut down the system. I grabbed my coat and ran. Driving home through the Chicago blizzard, I couldn't feel the heater. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm that matched the hammering of my heart. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror looked like a threat. When I finally locked the door of my small suburban house, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow pile up against the window, waiting for the sun to rise. I knew that when I walked back into that building tomorrow, I wouldn't be walking into a job. I would be walking into a war zone. The next morning, the VS Holdings Tower looked the same as it always did, a monolith of steel and glass piercing the gray winter sky. But as I swiped my badge at the turnstile, the beep sounded sharper, louder. The lobby guard, a man I had greeted for a decade, didn't look me in the eye. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, my stomach twisted in knots, a physical nausea that tasted like copper. I walked down the long hallway to my office, rehearsing what I would say. I would demand an audit. I would show them the video. I would be brave. But when I unlocked my door, I realized I was already too late. The smell hit me first, stale coffee and expensive, overpowering cologne. Marcus, the chief financial officer, was already inside. He wasn't standing by the window or waiting by the door. He was sitting in my chair. He had physically inserted himself into my space, his elbows resting on my desk, his fingers idly toying with the framed photograph of my late husband. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a morning greeting. His voice was smooth, polished, the voice of a man who could fire 1,000 people and then go play 18 holes of golf without missing a stroke. "You're early." Standing behind him were two men I didn't recognize. They wore the company's IT polo shirts, but the shirts were tight across their chests, stretching over muscles that came from a gym, not a server room. They stood with their arms crossed, blocking the view of the window. "What is this, Marcus?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice level, but it sounded thin in the acoustic deadness of the room. "Why are you at my desk?" Marcus smiled. It was a thin expression, devoid of warmth, showing too many teeth. He placed my husband's photo face down on the desk. The sound of the frame hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. "We flagged some irregular activity on your terminal last night, Sarah," he said, his tone dripping with faux concern. "Corporate compliance protocols. When a potential breach is detected, we mandate an immediate hardware refresh. For your protection, of course." He didn't say, "I am taking your evidence." He used the sterile, weaponized language of bureaucracy. Asset protection, compliance, refresh. I stepped forward, ignoring the two men who stiffened as I moved. "I saw the code, Marcus. Code 99. It rerouted my bonus. It rerouted the entire executive batch. I have it on video." Marcus didn't blink. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and condescension, the way you look at an elderly relative who has started to forget names. "Sarah," he sighed, shaking his head. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. The holidays, the tuition bills. We know it's been hard since your husband passed. End-of-year fatigue can cause confusion, visual hallucinations." "I am not hallucinating," I snapped. The cursor moved on its own. "The logs show your batch processed normally," he interrupted, his voice hardening just a fraction. "There was no code, there was no reroute. Just a tired woman working too late in the dark." He gestured to the two men. One of them stepped forward, reached behind my monitor, and ripped the power cord out of the wall. The sound of the plug tearing from the socket was violent, final. The other man picked up my computer tower, my hard drive, my 15 years of emails, my archives, my proof, and dropped it into a plastic bin. "Take the day off, Sarah," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "We'll have a new clean machine set up for you by Monday." It was gaslighting in its purest, most brutal form. He wasn't just lying to me, he was rewriting reality in front of my face. He was daring me to scream, daring me to make a scene so he could label me unstable. I stared at him. I wanted to claw his eyes out, but I saw the way his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflink. He wasn't calm. He was terrified. He was reacting too fast, too aggressively. This wasn't just Marcus. He was following a script. I turned around and walked out of my office without a word. My hands were balled into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I couldn't leave the building. Not yet. If I walked out now, I walked out with nothing. I needed to know the scale of what I was fighting. I needed eyes on the inside, eyes that Marcus couldn't blind. I waited in the stairwell until the hallway was clear, then I took the freight elevator down. Down past the lobby, down past the parking garage, down to the sub-basement. This was the forgotten world of V.S. Holdings. The air here smelled of ozone, dust, and the hum of high-voltage electricity. This was Leo's kingdom. Leo was the former head of IT, a genius who had built the company's original infrastructure 20 years ago. He had been demoted to legacy maintenance because he refused to sign off on the CEO's plan to migrate our core servers to a cheap, insecure cloud provider. Leo was 60. Cynical, and hated everything about the modern internet. He sat, surrounded by towers of obsolete servers, eating a sandwich in the blue glow of a CRT monitor. "Sarah," he grunted, not looking away from his screen. "You look like hell." "I need you to look at something, Leo," I said. My voice was shaking. I pulled out my phone and played the video. Leo watched it in silence. He watched it once. Then he took the phone from my hand and watched it again, bringing the screen inches from his thick glasses. He stopped chewing. "Code 99, he whispered. He spun his chair around and faced a dusty, beige computer terminal in the corner. It looked like something from the 1990 seconds. It was air-gapped, physically disconnected from the company internet, invisible to Marcus's monitoring tools, but hardwired directly into the building's copper mainframe. "They think they scrubbed the logs," Leo muttered, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "But they only scrubbed the interface layer. The kernel. The kernel remembers everything." Lines of green code cascaded down his screen. I held my breath. "It's a mirror script," Leo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He looked up at me, and for the first time in the decade I had known him, I saw fear in his eyes. "Sarah, this isn't just your bonus. The Code 99 command. It's attached to the Severance Indemnity Fund." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I grabbed the edge of his desk to steady myself. The Severance Fund. That was the legally protected money set aside to pay employees in the event of layoffs. It was supposed to be untouchable. "Show me," I said. Leo pointed to a string of numbers. "They're planning a restructuring. A massive one. Next month, 200 staff members are tagged for termination. But look at the balance." I looked. The figure was 0. "The money is gone," Leo said. "They siphoned it all into the V.S. exec pool. They're going to fire 200 people in the dead of winter, and they're going to do it for cause inventing fake violations so they don't have to pay out a single dime of severance." I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just theft. This was murder by spreadsheet. They were going to destroy 200 families, take away their safety nets, and leave them destitute to fund the CEO's next yacht or cover a bad investment. "Can you copy the log?" I asked. "If I do, and they catch me, I lose my pension," Leo said. He looked at the screen, then he looked at me. He saw the desperation in my face. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small, battered USB drive. "Take it, but Sarah, if they find this on you, they won't just fire you. They'll bury you." I took the drive. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a bullet. I put the drive in my pocket and went back upstairs. My plan was to get my coat and leave, to disappear before they realized I wasn't at the spa. But as I stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a notification that made my blood run cold. "Mandatory meeting. Boardroom B. Immediate attendance." It wasn't a request, it was a summons. I walked down the long corridor. The office was buzzing with the usual morning noise, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but it felt like I was walking underwater. People looked at me, then quickly looked away. They knew. In a corporate environment, the smell of a victim travels faster than sound. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of Boardroom B. It was a large room, dominated by a long mahogany table. Marcus was there, but he wasn't alone. Sitting to his left was the Director of Human Resources, a woman named Linda who smiled too much. To his right was the head of legal, a man named Mr. Henderson who never smiled at all. There was no coffee, no water pitcher, just a single, thick folder sitting in the center of the table. "Have a seat, Sarah," Marcus said. I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the table, gripping the back of a leather chair. "What is this?" Marcus sighed, a performance of deep regret. He slid the folder across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my hand. The label read, "Notice of Administrative Leave, Pending Investigation." "We found evidence of serious financial misconduct, Sarah," Marcus said. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. I stared at him, mouth slightly open. They were accusing me? "We believe you used your administrative privileges to attempt an unauthorized transfer of funds last night," Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, said. His voice was dry, like crumbling paper. "The glitch you reported was, we believe, a clumsy attempt to cover your tracks when the system flagged your theft." "That is a lie," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You are the thieves. I have proof." "We have the logs," Henderson interrupted, raising a hand. "And given the severity of the attempted embezzlement, VS Holdings is exercising its right under your employment contract to protect its assets." He paused, letting the silence stretch out. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Furthermore, pending the conclusion of the investigation, your internal assets, specifically your 401k retirement fund, your unvested stock options, and your accrued pension are frozen. The world stopped. My 401k, my stock options, that was 15 years of savings. That was my life. That was my son's future. They weren't just firing me, they were stripping me naked. They were holding my future hostage to force me into silence. "You can't do that," I whispered. "We can," Henderson said. "And we have." "We want to handle this quietly, Sarah, for your sake. If you sign a voluntary resignation and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, we might be persuaded to unfreeze your assets and forgo criminal charges. You could walk away with your reputation intact." It was blackmail. Pure, simple, corporate blackmail. "Sign the paper, shut your mouth, and we'll let you keep your own money." I looked at the pen sitting on top of the folder. It was a Mont Blanc. Expensive, heavy. I looked at Marcus. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the way Linda from HR was fidgeting with her necklace. They were pushing too hard. You don't bring the head of legal to suspend a mid-level accountant unless you are terrified of what she knows. I didn't pick up the pen. I reached out and pushed the folder back across the table. "I'm not signing anything," I said. The room went deadly silent. Marcus's smile vanished. "Then security will escort you out," Henderson said. "Now." The walk to the elevator was the final act of the play. They didn't just let me leave. They called security. 2 large uniformed guards arrived within seconds, as if they had been waiting outside the door. "Ma'am," the lead guard said, "please collect your personal effects." He stood over me while I walked to my desk. The entire office floor had gone silent. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them burning into my back. The walk of shame. It was a ritual designed to strip an employee of all dignity, to show the herd what happens to a sheep that strays. I picked up my box. I put in my coffee mug, the stress ball my son gave me, the small potted succulent that was dying from the lack of light. "I need to inspect the bag, ma'am," the guard said, pointing to my purse. "Company policy, to ensure no data theft." My heart stopped. The USB drive. The drive Leo had given me, the only copy of the raw server logs, the only thing that proved I wasn't a thief, was sitting loose in my pocket. I had to put it in the bag. If I kept it in my pocket and they patted me down. But I had anticipated this. I had 5 seconds while the guard was checking the cardboard box. My hand moved to my purse. In the side pocket, I kept a compact powder case, a cheap, round, beige makeup container. The hinge was cracked. I popped it open. The powder cake was broken. I slipped the USB drive inside, pressing it into the loose powder, and snapped the lid shut. I dropped it back into the side pocket, right next to a box of tampons. "The bag, ma'am?" the guard repeated. I handed it to him. My palms were sweating. He opened the main compartment. He rummaged through my wallet. He shook my notebook to see if any papers fell out. Then, he reached for the side pocket. His thick fingers brushed against the box of tampons. He hesitated. He touched the beige makeup case. He paused. I held my breath. I looked him in the eye. He was a man doing a job he probably hated. He looked at the feminine products. He looked at me, a 42-year-old woman staring him down. The social barrier held. The conditioning was stronger than the protocol. He didn't want to be the creep digging through a woman's intimate items. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. He zipped the pocket shut. "Clear," he grunted to Marcus. I took my bag. My knees were weak, but I stood tall. I walked past Marcus, past the staring colleagues, and into the elevator. When the doors opened to the lobby, the cold wind from the revolving doors hit me. I walked out into the Chicago winter. The snow was falling harder now, white flakes swirling against the gray concrete. I stood on the curb, clutching my box of meager belongings, shivering in my thin coat. I looked up at the building. 42 floors of steel and arrogance. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my job, my money, and my dignity. They thought that by taking my computer and freezing my accounts, they had disarmed me. They were wrong. I hailed a taxi. Suburbs, I told the driver. When I got home, the house was cold. I didn't turn up the heat. I locked the deadbolt. I closed the curtains. I went straight to my bedroom. I knelt down on the floor and reached under the bed. My hand brushed against cold metal. I pulled. It was heavy. A fireproof steel trunk, battered and scratched. I dragged it out, the sound of metal on hardwood echoing in the silent house. I pulled the key from the chain around my neck. My hands were shaking, but the lock clicked open smoothly. I threw back the lid. Inside, smelling of old paper and ink, were 15 leather-bound books. My ledgers. You see, I am a creature of habit, and I suffer from a professional paranoia that trusts nothing digital. For 15 years, every time I finalized a month-end report, every time I saw a number that didn't look quite right, every time a decimal point shifted in a way I couldn't explain, I wrote it down. I didn't trust the cloud. I didn't trust the server. I trusted ink. I reached into my purse, pulled out the compact case, and retrieved the USB drive. It was dusted with beige powder. I set it on the floor. Then I picked up the ledger for the current fiscal year. I opened it. Pages and pages of my own handwriting, neat columns of black ink. I began to read. I began to cross-reference. I worked for hours. The sun went down, the room filled with shadows. I turned on a desk lamp and kept working, and there it was. The theft hadn't started last night. It hadn't started with the Christmas bonus. I traced the line items back. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Small amounts at first, a vendor fee inflated by 2%. A consulting invoice for a company that didn't exist. A duplicate payment for maintenance. It was a web. A massive, intricate web of theft that had been bleeding the company dry for half a decade. The VS exec pool wasn't just a bucket for stolen bonuses, it was a black hole that had swallowed over $15 million. I sat back against the bed frame. My tea had gone cold hours ago. $15 million, stolen from the people who cleaned the floors, the people who answered the phones, the people who trusted their pension funds were safe. And I had it all. I had the server logs from Leo that showed how they did it, and I had the ghost ledgers that showed when and how much. Marcus thought he had silenced a suspended employee. He didn't know he had just sent the only person with the master key home to organize the evidence. I looked at the burning fireplace. For a second, I thought about throwing the books in. It would be so easy. Just walk away, start over. Then I looked at the photo of my husband on the nightstand. He hated bullies. I closed the ledger. The sound was loud, heavy, like a judge's gavel. I wasn't going to get my job back. I was going to take the whole building down, brick by brick. I did not go to the police station that morning because the law operates on timelines measured in years, requiring a bureaucratic intake that would give V.S. Holdings ample time to shred documents, wipe servers, and construct a narrative painting me as a disgruntled, unstable widow. Instead, I aimed for the one entity Victoria Sterling feared more than the Department of Justice, the money itself. Knowing the company was due for its mandatory external audit by Kensington and Bryce the following week, I sat at my kitchen table drinking cold coffee and opened a physical phone book, another relic I trusted more than the internet, to find the direct line for the senior partner, Elias Thorne. I didn't call him, knowing a call leaves a digital record that could be subpoenaed or deleted, so I drove 3 towns over to a copy shop, standing in the rhythmic hum of the Xerox machine as I printed out the server logs from the USB drive Leo had given me and duplicated 10 specific pages from my ghost ledgers. I placed the documents into a plain, heavy manila envelope and drove into the city, parking 5 blocks away from the auditor's headquarters to walk into the lobby with my collar turned up against the wind, handing the package to the receptionist with strict instructions that it was personal correspondence for Mr. Thorne regarding the VS Holdings portfolio. I didn't leave a name or return address. I simply walked back out into the gray afternoon and waited, knowing that Elias Thorne was a man who viewed financial discrepancies as personal insults, and that when he saw the Severance Indemnity Fund balance in my ledger did not match the inflated numbers V.S. Holdings had sent him, he wouldn't just ask questions, he would declare war. The reaction was faster than I anticipated because by the following afternoon, although my phone remained silent, the news alerts on my laptop began to ping with reports that VS Holdings had announced an unscheduled trading halt due to a pending internal review, causing the stock price to freeze in a financial heart attack. I sat in my living room watching the news ticker, visualizing the auditors bypassing the coffee and pastries to go straight to the server room with forensic specialists, imagining Victoria Sterling scrambling to charm them while realizing that math is not susceptible to charm. Finally, my phone rang, displaying the name Marcus, and I let it ring 3 times before answering to hear the ragged, shallow breathing of a man who had been running with nowhere left to go. Marcus sounded broken, whispering that Victoria was throwing him to the wolves, telling the auditors he acted alone and embezzled the funds to cover gambling debts, and that she was drafting a press release naming him as the rogue actor. I felt no pity. Only a cold validation that weak predators are always eaten by the strong when food becomes scarce. So when I asked why he was calling, he admitted he had insurance recordings of the strategy sessions where Victoria ordered the code to be installed. I told him to meet me at a diner near the airport, a transient place where 2 people looking at documents wouldn't draw a second glance, and 40 minutes later, a disheveled Marcus slid a small digital recorder across the laminate table, begging me to hand it to the auditors as the whistleblower because they wouldn't listen to him as a suspect. I picked up the light, insignificant device that held the power to dismantle a dynasty and told him I would tell the truth, which was more than he had ever given me. 2 days later, the summons came not as a termination notice, but as a formal invitation from the board of directors requesting my presence at an emergency session, copied to Elias Thorne and the Securities and Exchange Commission, confirming they needed me not as an employee, but as the witness holding the knife pressed against the company's throat. I dressed in my best Navy suit, applied my makeup with steady hands, and packed the 15 leather-bound ledgers into a rolling suitcase, dragging the heavy physical burden of 15 years of vigilance out to my car as the wheels crunched on the salted driveway. The boardroom was freezing, yet the entire board of directors sitting around the mahogany table was sweating, with Victoria Sterling at the head looking impeccable in a mask of icy composure, though her white knuckles gripping the chair betrayed her terror. The chairman thanked me for coming to address the discrepancies, but Victoria cut him off with a sharp, practiced defense, claiming I was a disgruntled employee who manufactured the documents to blackmail the company, and that the official server logs would prove she was a victim of a rogue CFO. She was banking on the idea that digital records were absolute and would hold up against my word, unaware that I had brought the one thing she couldn't hack. I didn't give Victoria the satisfaction of an argument. Instead, I walked to the end of the table and unzipped the suitcase, the sound loud in the silent room, and began lifting the ledgers out one by one, thick, cracked black leather books with yellowed pages stacking them until they formed a wall between me and the CEO. I announced that these were the ghost ledgers, explaining that for 15 years I had manually reconciled every transaction because I trusted only what I could verify with a calculator and pen. I opened the top ledger to a red sticky note detailing a payment from 3 years ago for strategic consulting to a shell company in the Cayman Islands that the digital log showed as a maintenance fee, and slid the intercepted original invoice across the table to Elias Thorne, who confirmed it matched the offshore account they had identified. Victoria stiffened as I opened another book to reveal how she diverted the employee bonus pool into her brother's hedge fund under the guise of a tax liability adjustment. And as Thorne nodded again, the board members shifted in their seats, watching the mask slip from their leader's face. Finally, I placed Marcus's digital recorder on the table and pressed play, filling the room with Victoria's bored, arrogant voice ordering Marcus to route the severance cash to the exec pool and wipe the trail with code 99. The absolute silence that followed was the sound of a career and a reputation ending in real time as Victoria slumped back in her chair, looking at the stack of paper and ink she had dismissed and realizing they were now the walls of her prison. The aftermath was a slow, bureaucratic dismantling as federal agents politely escorted Victoria out the side door, her high heels clicking on the hardwood for the last time, dissolving the illusion of her power. The tired, frightened chairman turned to me, offering to immediately reinstate my position, unfreeze my assets, and pay my bonus with interest if I would help them clean this up and show them where the bodies were buried. I looked at the boardroom that had once been my summit and the stack of ledgers containing the margins of my son's childhood and realized I didn't want to be the janitor for their corruption anymore. I refused, stating that I would leave the company property ledgers with the auditors, but that I was not company property, and I placed my ID badge on the table next to the recorder, demanding they unfreeze my assets by the end of the day, pay the severance to the 200 employees, and communicate with my attorney regarding the whistleblower compensation. I walked out of the boardroom, down the hallway past the empty cubicle where I had worked for 15 years, and took the elevator to the lobby where the guard who had searched my purse stood up straight and nodded as I passed. I walked out into the brilliant, piercing blue sky of the Chicago winter, and when my son texted to ask if everything was okay because the tuition was paid, I typed back, "Everything is balanced." I did not go back to corporate finance because the substantial whistleblower settlement was enough to pay for graduate school, fix the house, and ensure I never worried about heating oil again. I spent the first month doing absolutely nothing but sleeping and reading books without numbers, sitting by the fireplace to watch the flames. One evening, I opened the steel trunk at the foot of my bed, which was now empty because the ghost ledgers were locked away in a Department of Justice evidence locker. I expected to feel a sense of loss, but instead, I felt light, realizing that for 15 years I had carried the weight of their sins in my handwriting and been the keeper of secrets that weren't mine. Now, the ink was dry, the account was closed, and for the first time in my life, the ledger of my own soul was perfectly, beautifully zeroed out. I proved that, in a corporate world obsessed with noise, silence isn't weakness, it is a strategy. They thought they could erase my digital footprint, but they forgot that the truth always leaves a paper trail. Real power isn't about who shouts the loudest in the boardroom, it's about who holds the pen when the final check is written. If you have ever had to quietly plan your exit from a place that didn't deserve you, remember, you aren't powerless, you are just preparing. If my story spoke to you, like, comment, and share this with someone who is still finding their own voice.